So it's a great honour to welcome everyone to this webinar this morning. We are beyond excitement to have Fiona Gooch from Traidcraft and Jenny Holloway from Fashion Enter with us today. Just a massive warm welcome to you both, and we are really looking forward to what you have to say to us today. We'd also like to welcome the MSPs who are on this call. We've made you panelists so that you can actually be part of this conversation, and we welcome you here. We recognise you have busy workloads, and making time to be here is not an easy thing to do. So we do welcome you very warmly and thank you for being here. I'd like to also apologise. I bring apologies from the First Minister, who personally apologised for not being here this morning and asked us to keep her in contact with, up to date with our activities. So we thank her for our interest. And we've also been in contact with MPs from Westminster, and we've had several apologies from them, but we will be sending them the recording of this film, as we will to the MSPs who weren't able to be here, so that we keep up to date, everyone keeps up to date. Our previous meeting has had over 100 people view the film of that, so we know that the films are really important as well. So yeah, so thank you very much for being here. I just want to alert you to the format of this meeting, which will be similar to previous meetings in that we invite our speakers to speak for approximately 10 minutes, and then we allow approximately 10 minutes for immediate discussion so that we don't let any topics go cold. We invite discussion. We know that that's when we learn, and we know that when we've just heard something, we're ready to ask those important questions. So what we'll be doing is that I will begin with a pause, a moment, just to centre ourselves here. Then I'll pass on to Nikki Taylor, who is the National Coordinator for Fashion Revolution Scotland. Then Nikki will pass on to Natasha Staden, who is also part of the policy team here in Fashion Revolution Scotland. And Natasha is going to take us on from there, introducing our speakers and facilitating the discussion. So just before we start, I wonder if you might just allow a moment to centre ourselves here. You don't need to close your eyes, but I would encourage you to have a pause in this moment. We have so many important things buzzing in our heads. Already, I'm sure your mornings have been exceptionally busy. So I would encourage you to recognise that we can only do one thing at a time, as much as we like to think we can multitask. And that's for the people watching this film later on as well. It's tempting to answer emails, do social media, and try and listen. But for this moment, I'd encourage you to be just here, to leave what's happened before this meeting behind us. It's in the past. And to recognise that what's going to happen after this meeting is in the future, is not here with us. And allow ourselves just to be in this space and to breathe deeply into this space. To recognise our connection with each other in this virtual room. And also to recognise our connection with nature, who supplies that air that we breathe, the water that we drink, and the food that we eat. And as we recognise that connection, knowing that humanity is just one subsection of nature, that we're just a small part of it, and that we connect with all humans throughout our planet. The ones that we can see just now, the ones that we know exist within our worlds, and those that are scattered over the planet. And we think particularly of those people who are involved in the production of the clothes that we wear, the people who ensure that we are protected, though we never meet them, and recognise our connection with them. So as we're centred here now, I just want to pass on to Nikki to tell us a little bit about the work of Fashion Revolution Scotland. Thanks, Nikki.
Hello everyone, thank you and welcome to joining us today and taking the time out to listen, contribute and above all take action with us. We're very excited today to welcome the wonderful Fiona Gooch and Jenny Holloway. We started Fashion Revolution Scotland in 2014 and have a very inspiring team of dedicated volunteers with a growing community. We're part of a global movement in over 100 countries and have seen this positive growth and engagement across Scotland too. We use this platform to ask questions, raise standards and set an industry-wide example of what better looks like. This is our 6th meeting with MSPs and our 3rd and final public Meet the Policymaker event of this series. Since we started these conversations, we've had a motion lodged for Fashion Revolution Scotland to acknowledge the campaign by MSP Monica Lennon. Our aim is for a new cultural narrative which respects both human rights and the rights of nature. Human rights and exploitation within fashion, footwear and textile supply chains is a very important issue, and having personally worked as a designer for over 2 decades, working within UK buying teams, I've seen the problems firsthand of buyers with a lot of power and control continually trying to knock down prices from suppliers, and the problems and detrimental effects to both people and our planet from this buying culture and the way that this behaviour is most often encouraged. So anyway, I'd like to end with our vision of the future at Fashion Revolution, which is to see a global fashion industry that conserves and restores the environment and values people over growth and profit. Thank you.
Thanks, Nikki and Fiona. Sorry, Karen. Do you know what I love about the UK is its pro-entrepreneurial spirit. Anyone can start a business. Anyone can have a business. In 2004, I was standing in Glasgow City Chambers to accept a Woman in Enterprise Award for a sleepwear brand that I'd started. And as the Lord Provost, Liz Cameron, handed me my award, I thought, how is my good business going to last? At that time, I was helping factories in Scotland get subcontracting work for each other to level out their fluctuations. But week by week, we were just seeing factories close down and brands moving their production abroad. Looking back, to me, it signifies the beginning of a race to bottom with prices. It might have happened a few years before that, but that's where, I really started to notice this. And the tipping point for some brands and manufacturers to normalise the exploitation of all parts of the supply chain for financial gain beyond the profits that were already received. This is where I became obsessed with supply chains, and since then to present day, I've sadly observed and investigated a significant amount of abusive behaviours throughout supply chains. So where are we today in Scotland? Well, unfortunately, the decline of homegrown manufacturing means there aren't many Scottish apparel manufacturers to exploit anymore. Cold comfort indeed. This doesn't mean that exploitation has ceased. Scotland still has some very large apparel companies that buy goods from suppliers in both the UK and around the globe. And also, it's actually illegal to be naked on the streets in this country. So the consumption of apparel affects every single one of us. And I'm sure we all have our favourite pieces of armour, whether it be for comfort, for fabulous form, or for function. So as consumers, is it up to us to ensure there's no social and low impact on the apparel that we buy? Or should it be brand owners' remit? Or should it be the suppliers? Should it be government? Or should it be the workers? It should be all of us. We all have a role to play and we all have a voice in how we want our world to be. We cannot point the finger at any part of the supply chain and say, it's them. We're all interlinked, including every single person on this call today. Do you know, the last time after, the very next day after our MSP event, I was walking down Ingram Street in Glasgow and a couple crossed the street to decisively come and meet my dog, which is not unusual because he has fabulous eyebrows. Anyway, so they informed me that their daughter really wants a dog, and we were talking breeds, and I said, oh, do you know what? I put him up on this app called Borrow My Doggy, to which they remarked, oh, our daughter was working for a major brand and went on that app to help with her mental health, and launched straight into, not knowing any of my background, that she was working for a buying department and was bullied, has come back to Glasgow, lost all her confidence. She reported it, it was handled internally, nothing happened. And since then, it's happened to quite a few other people in that buying department. Of course, I did ask which brand it was, and I was a little surprised to hear which brand it was actually. But I was also able to turn around and say, do you know, Fashion Revolution Scotland has brought this issue to about brands purchasing practices to Scottish Parliament's attention. So welcome today. But please tell your daughter that she's not alone, and that many of my friends have ended up in therapy after working in buying departments. Sharing these aggressions towards employees is not enough, though. When the whole system, from denial of unionisation and representation for factory floor workers to the damaging practice of non-disclosure agreements for wronged employees, is designed to benefit the few at the top of their link in the chain. Now, there are many, many suppliers, brands, NGOs, not-for-profits and government departments that have been working in this lane to improve the situation, improve the situation in their lane, but there are missing links. Indemnity for workers against benefit fraud for those financially exploited, fit to trade licensing schemes to ensure suppliers are operating legally, CEOs responsible for exploitation in their supply chain, and to what we're going to be in conversation about today, the regulation of brands' purchasing practices. There's been a gradual boundary stretch on the pricing in the industry, which has now reached abusive levels and shows an overarching pattern of control not encompassed by existing legislation. Like any abusive relationship, we need intervention to reset the boundaries and ensure all brands do the right thing and strongly represent the message of morals coupled with margins, and have a leading UK apparel sector. We've seen we've seen brands continue to see massive growth and profit with trading with impunity on their exploitative practices. We've also seen the devastation of communities with needless loss of life due to unsafe working practices. Is any item of clothing that you wear worth the dignity of a human? Fashion Revolution Scotland Policy Group volunteers today, thank you, and Katie, who is absent. We will be bringing this conversation to members of Scottish Parliament and members of the public of the need for an apparel adjudicator, much like the successful grocery adjudicator that was launched in 2014. So thank you very much for being here today, and for those who are watching on replay. Today, I'm very humbled to have two awesome women here. Fiona Gooch, the Senior Policy Advisor for Traidcraft, instrumental in the latest Environmental Audit Committee fixing fast fashion and the call for a Garment Adjudicator, and Jenny Holloway from Fashionenta, a social enterprise ethical manufacturer, to discuss the need for government intervention on brands' purchasing practices and solutions on how that can be achieved with government support. So before I pass you on to Fiona from Traidcraft, I'm just going to show a small video that was made in conjunction with Aberdeen University.
পার্শ্ববর্তী যারা থাকে তারা গার্মেন্টস ফ্যাক্টরিতে যায়, তখন বলছে যে তুমি অনেক কষ্টে আছো, আমাদের সাথে ফ্যাক্টরিতে চলো গার্মেন্টসে, সেখানে যাইলে ভালো বেতন হবে এই জন্য আমি ওদের মাধ্যমে তখন গার্মেন্টসে যাই। কাজের ক্ষেত্রে ভালো ব্যবহার করে, যে সময় আমার কাজ খারাপ হয় তখন অবশ্যই আমার সাথে খারাপ ব্যবহার করে।
আর ফিনিশিং এ আপনার যেখানে লোক লাগবে 50 জন, সেখানে লোক রাখে মাত্র 15 জন। টানা কাজ করা লাগে। আমাদের ফ্যাক্টরিটার ফুল বলতে গেলে আপনার নিয়মের বাহিরেই চলে। আর ওভার টাইম যেরকম আমি যেখানে ওভার টাইম পাবো হলো 1500 টাকা, সেখানে আমার দেয় হচ্ছে 700-800 টাকা। যদি বলি যে স্যার এরকম কেন আমাকে এই টাকাটা কম দিচ্ছেন, বললো যে পোষাইলে কাজ করে না, পোষাইলে চলে যাও, গেট খোলা আছে তোমাদের জন্য, তোমাদের আমরা আসি না, তোমরা চলে গেলে তোমাদের ওখানে 1000 মেয়েরা দাঁড়ায় আছে। লকডাউন হওয়ার পরে তো পরিবারের অবস্থা খুবই খারাপ ছিল। আমার চাকরিটা তো প্রথম সপ্তাহে আমাদেরকে 8 দিন বন্ধ দিয়েছিল। এরকম করতে করতে প্রায় 2 মাস চলে গেছে। আমার চাকরিটার ভিতরে হাতছাড়া হয়ে গেছিল। পরে ফোনের মাধ্যমে সুপারভাইজারের সাথে কথা বলতে পরে আবার চলে গেছিল। পরে এখানে অনেক কষ্ট হয়েছিল আমার, কয়েকদিন চলতে বহুত কষ্ট হয়েছে। মেয়ের খাবার দিতে পারতাম না ঠিক মতো, মেয়ের বেতন দিতে পারি নাই। তারপর 8 দিনের মাথায় যখন আবার অফিসে গেলাম তখন বললো যে আরো 7 দিন।
তখন বলেছে যে আমাদের অফিসে যে সময় লকডাউন শুরু হয় তখন কিছু কাজ ছিল, তখন আমাদেরকে আগে ভাগে করে নাইট মেট করে আমাদেরকে কাজটা করে নিছে। নেওয়ার পর আমাদেরকে আর বেতন দেওয়া হয়নি। বেতন দেওয়া হয় না, যে অফিস খুললে তোদের বেতন দেওয়া হবে, এর আগে তোমাদেরকে বেতন দেওয়া হবে না। পরবর্তীতে আমরা গেলাম, তখন আমাদেরকে হাফ বেতন দেওয়া হয়েছে, ফুল বেতন আমাদেরকে দেয় না। মানে লকডাউনের আগে আমাদেরকে ফুল ডিউটি করেছে, ফুল মাসের ডিউটি করেছে। করানোর পরে তখন আমাদেরকে বলছে কি যে অফিস খুললে বেতন দেবো, নাহলে বেতন দেবো না। পরে আমাদেরকে মোবাইলের মাধ্যমে বলছে যে বরবার আটকাইছে, পরে কোনো খাবার নাই। তাহলে আমরা ফুল মাসের ডিউটিটা যে করেছি লকডাউনের আগে, সে বেতনটা তো আপনার কাছে আমরা পাও না। উনি বলছে কি যে আমি এই টাকা পরে দিব। পরে বারবার ফোন দিছে, সে আমাদের ফোন ধরে না, আমি অসুস্থ।
সবসময় তো এক থাকে না শরীর। যখন আমার এখন জ্বর হলো, জ্বর বসে আমার কাজ করে না, বাধ্যতামূলক। কিন্তু বাসায় তো ওনারা বলি না, ডাইরেক্ট মারে তুলে বলবে বা পেলে তুলে বলবে, যা আসে মুখে তাই। তারপর তো এমনি এত রাত ব্যবহার করে যে সহ্য করার মতো না। তারপর চাকরি করা লাগে, যখন কাঁদতেছি ওনার মুখ খারাপ করছে, কাঁদতেছি, কান্দা অবস্থা আমার সে প্রোডাকশন দেওয়াই লাগতেছে।
Thank you very much. Fiona, would you like me to share your slides? Is that okay for you? And you can just say next slide, or would you like to share your slides?
Let me do my slides, but thank you for offering.
Pleasure.
Hang on, not quite as clever as I should be.
There's some links in the chat for Traidcraft Exchange if anyone wants to look at these links.
Thank you. Can you see that now? Thank you very much. Can I just say a really, what a pleasure it is to be here, and thank you very much for the opportunity for sharing an important solution that we think is needed for the garment sector. We've just seen a rather sobering video of women who were not paid money that they were owed and literally are unable to feed their families, let alone pay school fees, and feel that they have to capitulate, I suppose, to the relentless production targets set by international brands, even though they're not paid correctly. Now, this is part of a ripple effect, a pattern that goes out all over the world, started by the brands, which ultimately is felt by the workers. So I'm going to take you through a set of slides that essentially explains why this happens, what happened last year, and what we need to do to fix it, which is the need for a garment trading adjudicator, which we are calling in a fun sense, a fashion watchdog. So the main problem is that we are pushing pressures down the supply chain. So the problem starts with the retailer. The retailers and the brands are the ones who push for fast, flexible production. And ultimately, the effect of that is that workers suffer, because you've got flexible production, which means high volume today, nothing tomorrow, very cheap prices, but at the same time, we are meant to have good working conditions. And the effect of that overall is to actually drive the suppliers into a place where they actually need to lie, because everything around the purchasing practices of the brands drives an almost impossible situation to employ people on good terms. But then all of the CSR demands are essentially trying to get the suppliers to show that they are actually delivering good working conditions. So we are putting suppliers in a bit of a no-win position. So this is just an automatic thing that is passing down the supply chain. And that's essentially because there is no powerful entity above or putting pressure on retailers or brands. They are kings and queens in their supply chain, or emperors and empresses. No one else is putting them under any pressure whatsoever. Everyone else has to essentially bow or capitulate to their demands. So let me just take you through a usual ordering pattern for overseas production, and then I will explain why what happened last year was such a disaster. So for example, some very large brands are putting orders about 9 months ahead because you need to buy the fabric. The supplier basically takes out a loan, they buy all of the fabric, the yarn, the accessories based on that indicative order, then all of those materials arrive in their warehouse, then the final order is made. Workers are doing the work. It is then delivered to a port, it goes on a ship, and once it's on the ship, it's the responsibility of the brands. Brands and retailers only pay generally after it has landed in the UK, and sometimes significantly later than after it landed in the UK. And I'll come on to that. Once the supplier gets the money, they're able to pay off the bank loan. The reason I've got a picture of someone being kicked when they're down is essentially suppliers were already in a bad position. And then when COVID hit, they were kicked further with consequences for workers. So last year, the knee-jerk reaction of brands, even though many of them have got responsible purchasing practices, projects and commitments, is hold, cancel. Many of them are members of the Ethical Trading Initiative. They might be on SEDEX. They've all made these commitments to workers, but hold and cancel instantly means workers are in jeopardy. Then after that, the details started to come out of what the brands were doing to the suppliers on orders that they had already committed to. These are not things that they dreamt up. These are things that they committed to in contracts. Cancellations, discounts that are so large that the suppliers are now subsidizing production, future discounts, which is pretty terrible. You know, you don't even know if you're going to make a product, but they're already demanding you're going to have to give them a discount from the supplier perspective. Retrospective rebates, which means, you know, Gap said, well, I bought this much from you last year, please give me a discount on the basis you made money off me last year. And then conditional payments were attempted, which is where a supplier was asked to accept terms that they would only be paid after a certain proportion of their product had been sold in the shop in the UK. Clearly, that is totally inappropriate. The supplier has no control whatsoever as to when the retailer moves the stock from the warehouse into the shop, from the shop back room into the main floor, has no visibility on when things are put on display and when they're sold. That is a risk that is entirely inappropriate for a supplier to take, and they were able to push back on that. But it shows you the level of control and view that retailers have, that they can demand almost anything from their suppliers, that they even attempted that. So the impact on supplies is, as you can see, that is a ship at Southampton. It is absolutely full. And where's it going to go when it's all unpacked? No retailers wanted anything. This supplier, Mr. Mustafa's Udin, has stock absolutely coming out of his factory. What's he going to do with it? This is all stock that was bought for brands and retailers, but they are not choosing to pay for it. So Traidcraft very, very quickly launched a campaign last year in April, which was to contact the 10 largest brands by market share. We asked them what they were doing in relation to honouring their contracts, and we also asked them what they were doing in relation to workers. And huge thanks to the more than 16,000 people who took part in that campaign. We ran a comparative table on how they were publishing the answers to our questions. And unfortunately, the bulk of the table is red. They did not respond well at all. And many of them made marginal improvements. So Primark eventually committed to pay for the orders that it had made, but in fact, it will in practice only be paying more than a year late. So our overall conclusion is that asking suppliers to pay, not suppliers, sorry, retailers and brands to pay is relatively pointless when they hold all the cards, and essentially what they pay suppliers is a key determinant of their overall profit margin. Because if you push that low and then you sell to consumers high, your profit margin is bigger. So they don't want to lose their flexibility in what they do in terms of paying suppliers, and they really push down on not paying their suppliers if they could get away with it, even though it was illegal. So what about the impacts on workers? So this is a slide produced by the Clean Clothes campaign, and essentially it shows the kind of combination of bad impacts that had happened to workers in the different supply chains. So it's wage theft, so that's people being owed money, mass dismissals, inappropriately entirely, levels of harassment, and then obviously quite a lot of COVID unsafe working. So that's an underreporting. This slide comes from the middle of last year. And then obviously in the UK, we also heard about terrible working conditions in Leicester. And Jenny has a better overview of how we do production in the UK, but sometimes what we are doing in the UK is what I would call top-up supply. And that's got very fast turnaround, which results in very bad working conditions for workers. So internationally, it's something like £12 billion worth of clothes not paid for, but more importantly, it's about £2 to £4 billion worth of wages not paid, resulting in people who were able to feed their families now being extremely vulnerable. So it's 86 million workers in that extremely vulnerable category. Unfortunately, UK retailers are absolutely amongst the worst. So the Bangladesh Garment Manufacturers Association assessed that the UK owed Bangladeshi suppliers, so that's just a single source country, 170 million. And the next countries that owed large amounts of money were half the value. So the UK spectacularly failed to honour contracts. And you can understand why that might happen when you think that Next is buying from about 150 factories, Primark from more than 100. So the scale of these individual businesses' decisions on their suppliers and then on workers is just enormous. And unfortunately, this young woman here was beaten up outside the factory for demanding wages that she was owed. And I believe that the retailer that was buying from that factory, it has got high street shops in the UK. So what is needed? Basically, the brand's actions were unlawful, a breach of contract, but no supplier is ever going to take them to court because that would mean that they'd never get future orders. Clearly, it's very unethical and voluntary initiatives do not work. And the solution is a regulator to stop abusive purchasing practices. We've got the Groceries Code Adjudicator for the supermarket sector, and it has made an enormous improvement. So poor purchasing practices were incredibly widespread up until this adjudicator was appointed, and they now run an annual survey. So 79% of suppliers said that their retail customers, this is the supermarkets, were breaching the Fair Purchasing Code, and that had reduced to 29% in 2021. Then to give you a bit more detail, we noticed, for example, last year, if we were to look at a comparison on payment terms by the supermarkets, who after all are selling clothes as well as food, but the clothing part of their business is regulated, sorry, the food part is regulated and the clothing part isn't. M&S is 19 days, clothing is 120 days. Asda will pay their small suppliers in 14 days or 60 days, but they will pay their overseas non-food suppliers in 90 days. Sainsbury's is 45, Sainsbury's clothing suppliers are paid in 75 days on average. The Tesco's investigation that the first Groceries Code Adjudicator did, so that's the woman Christine Tacken at the top, she got the retailer Tesco's to repay suppliers the millions of pounds that it owed suppliers for sometimes several years, and essentially forced Tesco's to reassess their approach. The new adjudicator that we've got, Mark White, is doing a great job. He has now put in place a multilingual complaints mechanism and has doubled the number of suppliers completing his annual survey, so that he's getting a proper sense of how the food supermarkets are behaving to all of their suppliers, rather than a preponderance of those who can speak English. So these guys are doing a great job, and we need it for clothing. So we have just launched a campaign which is called the Fashion Watchdog campaign, and we would be incredibly grateful for anyone who sees this video to click on the petition to tell the BEIS ministers, so that's our Department for Business, that they need to establish a Garment Trading Adjudicator similar to the Groceries Code Adjudicator, but let's call it a Fashion Watchdog. It's an easier term. And for those of you that are here, please engage with your BEIS ministers, or if you are in different political parties, please engage with your shadow teams to put pressure on BEIS to essentially establish a fashion watchdog, because we as consumers at the moment cannot help but buy products from companies where it is that company that did the abusive purchasing practices to the suppliers that resulted in the bad working conditions. There is nothing to stop the retailers that we buy from treating their suppliers that badly. I've got no option on the mainstream high street except going to some of those retailers. And clearly that's wrong, and it doesn't have to be that way. Given that we go food shopping now, abusive purchasing practices have stopped, and as a consumer, I haven't seen any difference in the food offering. So we know it will work. And I've put a picture of Parliament and a dog at the bottom, because we campaigned for the supermarket watchdog successfully, and we sent in the minister a dog telling them we needed a watchdog, and we got it. So thank you very much, and I'm really happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Fiona. Does any of the MSPs on the panel have questions? If you'd like to, you can pop your video on, take yourself off mute, whatever you feel comfortable with, or raise your hand as well. Sarah, can I pick on you? You're usually quite vocal in the worker rights area. Is this all new information for you?
Yeah, I just want to jump on and say I'm here on behalf of Sarah. She had to pull out very last minute, so she sends her apologies. But I'm going to run through everything with her and then go from there. So sorry, she was supposed to come, but she had a conflicting appointment.
Thank you. MSPs, is there, I mean, one alarming thing for me that there is, you know, really just showing that difference between how retailers pay, you know, their suppliers, and that there is a very, you know, like if you don't have to pay them for a certain amount of time, that they won't. And that there is a really big distinction there between groceries and apparel. Do we have any questions in chat at all, or?
I'm wondering if there are any questions of clarification. I don't know if I was going too fast.
Oh, Colette's got her hand up. Thanks, Colette. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. And it's really insightful, everything that everyone's contributed today. So thanks very much. It's more an observation on my part. Prior to being elected in May, I was a councillor in South Lanarkshire, and I sat on the committee for Strathclyde pension funds. And I suppose, you know, we're, you know, obviously going forward about more to do with ethical investment in clothing. And I pushed the agenda forward about how, you know, like investment funds like Strathclyde Pension Fund should be leading the way in terms of investing in more ethical clothing and practices as well. Given that, you know, they're probably one of the top 12 in the whole of the UK, and how they can change that narrative as well. So whilst, you know, we've still got a lot of work to do in terms of regulation, it's maybe something we could look at going forward, particularly in the fashion industry, because I know, you know, I don't know how far it's gone, but I know like some really high designers like Stella McCartney are using a lot more ethical products as well as practices as well. So maybe something that we could take forward, or something that you've already looked into. But yeah, that's all. It was really just an observation more than anything else. And thanks so much for all your contributions, and happily take it forward in terms of the petition and whatnot as well. So thank you.
Hello.
So can I say thank you? So I think that from the pension fund's point of view, that the minimum that you should be aiming for is to make sure every company that you buy from, but I realize this is your old hat, but if you still had your old hat on, you know, it's essentially to ensure that the brands and the retailers publish who they are buying from, because it doesn't matter whether or not it's tea or clothing. If you are a workers group forced to do terrible working conditions, but you think you might be selling to an international brand, if you can find out who that brand is, you can then approach that brand or shame that brand in the public domain and say, my conditions are absolutely terrible. That doesn't stack up with your ethical commitments, and start a conversation that way. So more and more clothing retailers are publishing their supplier lists, but I mean, from me, that's kind of a minimum set of basic information. And then after that, begging the companies to do the right thing in terms of purchasing practices just doesn't work. And it will never work, because whenever there's a squeeze, they will always dump on suppliers. So there's no way around getting a regulator. And it would obviously be really helpful if the pension funds also ask for the regulator too. We want to invest ethically. We recognize we can't. We need a regulator. Please, will the government start up with establishing a regulator? And I should have said that the regulator for the supermarket sector is cost neutral to the taxpayer. It was recognized that the supermarket's behavior was so despicable for years and years and years prior that actually the cost of running that regulator needs to be paid for by the people it regulates, but it's run independently. So the money goes into BEIS, which is the Government Department for Business, and then they manage the regulator. So it's got an arm's length arrangement, but it's cost neutral to the taxpayer.
That's very good.
Thank you. Sorry, Jenny, I see you have your hand up, and also Carol Morgan, do you have your hand up there?
I put something in the post actually. That was a great presentation, Fiona, and we have spoken, and I think actually, you know, offline we need to do a lot more work together. And Colette, I take on board your comments as well, and I think being on the other side of the fence, and I'm actually an ex-senior buyer as well, so I've been on both sides of the fence. I think my concern at the moment is just greenwashing. No, we can all hide behind policies. I've got books and books, well, I've got folders and folders of policies, but actually we implement our policies and always have done. And I think the regulator's role is absolutely vital, but that they've got to have teeth as well, Fiona. Now, and it's not enough to have a statement or a policy. It needs to be dug into. It needs to be seen to be correct. And I don't want to say too much, because obviously I'm going to be talking in a moment. I've got a few slides to say. There are systems out there today that allows this to happen, and I'd be delighted to discuss those in more detail. And we've got everything to play for here. Now, we have to stop the decline in UK manufacturing. I'm horrified about your opening statement, Natasha. You know, all those wonderful skilled people in Scotland that now haven't got a job. It's criminal. It's just so wrong.
Thank you, Jenny. Carol, you have your hand up. We will address that if you like, and then we'll jump into your presentation. Thank you, Jenny. Carol?
I'm not sorry, I'm not working the system very well. I don't know what I did to put my hand up, but I do welcome you asking to come in. So
high five.
It's really, can I say it was one of the ones that really stood out to come along to, because we get, I'm sure you know, we get a lot. So it's really an important area that I think people genuinely don't realise the background, even though you and I do, but you know, just your peers and people you talk to, and so the more that we can get across the points that you're making to people, the better it'll be for the public. But this sort of over consumption of things, is a garment more important than a life, you know, and of course we all know, and not at all, but it's getting that message across to people in a way that is helpful for them to make changes and stuff. So it's been really, as I say, it was a standout one to come along to, so thanks very much.
Thank you. We do definitely have issues in other industries. I think very similar issues in Scotland in, say, the construction industry. We know nail bars, car washers are right up there as well. So, but for different reasons. Oh, Fiona, quick question.
Just, I think, because it's come up in the chat, so what can consumers do? It's actually the same thing. Get the retailers and brands to publish the list of suppliers. It's a factual piece of information with addresses. They know it. They can publish it, they control their websites, they can publish it. I'm afraid, a bit like Jenny, I'm not that interested in all of these statements that are not true, but a list of suppliers is a factual document. So I'm very keen that retailers and brands publish that, because it's genuinely useful to work as groups overseas, and ideally publish it in such a way that it can go on one of these databases that is collecting and comparing information. So that's sort of point number one. And then point number two is, please sign our petition. Get everyone you know to sign our petition, because at the moment, the Minister for Business is sitting on the fence. They are aware that this Garment Trading Adjudicator, the fashion watchdog, would be good. But as you can imagine, not all retailers are, let's say, whispering in his ear to say that it's a good idea, because fundamentally it will change the pricing potentially, and it may not change the pricing, but it may change the pricing of how they do business with their suppliers. It certainly will not enable them to do the short notice changes that have happened in the past. So that's, you know, a fairly important thing. So please sign the petition. And then my last kind of comment about things like policies is things we've always got to hear from the other side. So what's really good about the supermarket watchdog is that they run the annual survey for suppliers, they talk to people, and from that they hear directly from the suppliers, are the supermarkets treating them well or not? And obviously that survey is run confidentially. And the reason they are effective is that they are able to fine up to 1% of turnover. So the supermarkets have to pay attention, because, you know, no shareholder would accept a huge fine that could have been avoided.
Thank you, Fiona. We will pass the floor to Jenny Holloway now from Fashion Enter, which I'm really excited about because she's got some new machinery. And Jenny, would you like me to share your slides, or would you prefer to do it? So, yeah, you're on mute there, Jenny. So I'll just share this portion of my screen. Let me just, oh, there we go. Should be about right. Go for it, Jenny.
Great, thank you very much, Natasha. So I'm just going to sort of give you an overview of who we are and what we do, and give you some context. I'm just going to fly through this really, because I think that the debate afterwards is far more important. So thank you. So this is who we are. We are a social enterprise, and we've got two aims. We want to make beautiful garments ethically and sustainably, and also as a result of that, we realised there was a huge skill shortage. So we've opened up what we call our Fashion Technology Academy. I have been on two sides of the fence. You know, we hemorrhaged money for years because we wanted the factory to be done correctly. And I was a senior buyer at Arcadia, and I was a selector for M&S. So I knew about ethical compliance. I don't know how hard it is to achieve it on the margins that we have to operate on, but I think that put me in good stead because we knew what to do from the beginning. And you know, I've got a business studies degree and I understand how business works. And I actually feel sorry for lots of the other little factories that are in the UK where English isn't their first language, and it's difficult. You know, they need help and support. So you can see how they're sort of being pushed into corners to accept contracts that they really shouldn't. Thank you. So this is our factory. We've got actually two factories. Our main one is in Wales, and we've actually, sorry, our main one is in London, and we've got 3 units in North London. We have expanded. And then I went off to Newtown in Mid Wales with the intention of looking at buying the machinery from Laura Ashley plants. And then I met these women, which was just heartbreaking. You know, they'd been at Laura Ashley for 44 years, one lady who's called Rachel, who's our supervisor. And I'm always going to say this, I blame Anne Wynne, who's actually our presser, and she baked these cakes. And before I knew it, I was saying, don't worry, we're going to open up a factory. So all this about business plans and SWOT analysis and all of that went all out of the window. But I have no regrets. It's been challenging, but you can't let, I mean, I was told there was 150 machinists. There weren't actually, there were 77. But you can't let that skilled workforce just go. You just can't do it. It's totally, totally wrong. So we have got a very high ethical compliance. I think we're one of a handful of companies that's got a leading status in the fast forward audit, which I think is brilliant. We're also SMETA audited, and actually we're also audited by each individual retailer as well. So it's hard going on compliance and it is expensive. Thank you. That's our Fashion Technology Academy. I just love technical skills. I'm actually dyslexic myself. I found sort of early education quite difficult. And actually, there's a host of people out there, actually quite a lot of creative people that are dyslexic and have issues with certain sides of the brain. So to me, vocational skills is absolutely fantastic and they should be celebrated. Thank you. So this is one of the systems that we developed with a very talented guy called Mark Randall. And actually, we've had this system now 6 years. When it didn't work, when we first started the factory, we hemorrhaged money. You know, everybody talks about quality of machinists, and what people don't realise is that machinists have to be the same standard in a factory to have the right quality. And you have fast, medium and slow machinists, and actually having that a pay band that accommodates fast, medium and slow machinists actually doesn't work. What you have to do is to have live data that incentivizes people to work. Oh, it's gone. Anyway, I'll carry on. So by incentivizing people, they take ownership, they work in teams, and this system works because it's performance related pay. And on average, our machinists are earning between 11 and 19 pounds an hour. So it most definitely does work. And we know who made what stitch on what garment, let alone who made your clothes. And we also know how many hours they worked, and we can verify the money that they were paid as it goes into their accounts. Thank you. So, you know, why are we a dirty industry? Well, we've talked about this, so I'm going to let this slide go by. I don't think it's all straightforward. However, you know, I'm very well aware of not just Leicester, but areas in Manchester, in London, you know, and there is compliance by some of the machinists themselves. You know, they are on benefits. They don't want to leave benefits. They're happy to take a cash payment. So there's so much that needs to be done. But I totally agree with what Fiona said about making sure that the suppliers are highlighted and there is a database. So they should be completely accessible at any time by retailers, adjudicators, etc. Thank you. Okay, so let's pass on from that. So why are we sustainable? We look at everything from a sustainability perspective, and we aim for zero waste. And that means anything that we have from our factory from waste, we give to schools, we donate to local sewing groups. We set up the fcfabricstudio.com to sell a fabric at below actually cost prices. We then set up Be of London as a brand, which we just use end of roll fabrics for that. My husband's an electrician, and God knows, I'm sure he regrets saying that he will help me, but we've got LED lighting everywhere, a huge impact on our bills. Yet to paying for that work, but it's because I met him at 15 and he does love me. I keep telling him that. And we encourage all of our workforce to cycle where possible. You know, these are only little things, but we don't, you know, we reprint paper. We do everything that we possibly can. Thank you. But the bigger picture is technology. I knew probably a good 18 months ago that how we are making our garments in London is wrong. And I'm not saying that I'm some kind of soothsayer. I could just see the waste. I could see the amount of clothes that we're making. You see them piled up. It's almost fashion's unfashionable at the moment. And we have to have this new way of looking at how we're making garments. And the old method, Fiona, you were right again on your PowerPoint where you said, you know, traditionally retailers are ordering 9 months in advance. It is madness. It's utter madness that anybody is committing to a 2-season spring, summer, autumn, winter profile. I know when I was a buyer, I'd be working on 3 seasons at any one time, and we'd always be looking for OTB, open to buy budget. That is the only way forward for retailers today. And that pushing of stock onto consumer has got to stop. And it is about the consumer pulling the demand through. And that is about getting the right garments. So for ages, I mean, for years, we've wanted to do our own printing in-house for lots of reasons, unreliability, cost, printed fabric's really expensive. And then we were fortunate enough to meet Cornit on a panel discussion. Cornit is a multi-billion-pound company. They're based in Tel Aviv. And basically, as my husband says, I'm a really, really good nag. I went on and on and on about, you know, being a showcase for ethical printing. They have a printer called Presto that does not use water for printing. I was blown away. It uses a glass of water to clean the print heads. It can print on any fabric base. It is the most advanced technology. And Cornit very kindly, about 3 months ago, gave us a Presto machine, working in conjunction with ASOS as well. We had obviously installation costs, and ASOS very kindly supported on that. And so, you know, we're now vertically integrating backwards. We're looking at what we can do on that fabric. But what is brilliant is, as you can see by that picture, you don't have to print 300 minimum meters for a print run anymore. You know, we can do 1 meter, we can do 1 square meter, we can do 1 linear meter. And I think that is a huge sustainability aspect for the future. Thank you. And then not being content with having sustainability in this area, we wanted to make sure that we cut with absolute minimal waste, that our lay plans were highly effective. So we then were introduced to Zund, and Zund is a company that is based in Switzerland, and they've got a showcase in Milton Keynes. And we got to know them, we told them about Cornit. In fact, we were introduced by Cornit, and we now have a double-headed cutter that you can see here. This cuts out a garment in 59 seconds. I've never seen anything like it. And I'm becoming quite sad because things like this to me are so exciting. You know, what I don't want to do is misplace jobs within the industry, but likewise, you have to look at the total review of what technology can do today. And what the aim is that we are going to print garment into pattern pieces. Zund will then cut them out. We will then bundle, and then we will make on a far more enhanced cycle. So we can print 300 meters of fabric, or we can print 1 meter. But the speed of doing this is what is attractive to retailers. Is it more expensive? Yes, of course it's more expensive because, you know, we're doing more individual pieces, but surely to God, the exit margin has to be the most important now to a retailer, not the intake margin. And I think we're struggling as an industry here with regards to seeing the bigger picture.
Jenny, just sorry, we've got 4 minutes to 11, so we will kind of start wrapping up at 11, but we, the panelists are able to, you know, everybody's able to stay on until 11:30. We generally do stay half an hour later for any other questions, etc. But if you want to start wrapping up to the MSPs.
That's fine. Okay, next one. So I won't bother with that video, but it was going to show you how it works. Thank you.
We can pop the link in the chat function if you like for that one as well, if it's on the top. Yeah, thank you. So I'll stop sharing here and open.
Can I just say one thing, which is at the end? We're now aiming for one-piece flow and a micro factory. Now we are looking that we will have an order come in from the retailer and the customer, that we will make that one garment, we will act as a fulfillment, and we will send that garment out. Like, that's the future of garment manufacturing that we see today. And when we were off air earlier, I was saying to Natasha, it's been painful to get where we are, but please, Scotland, listen to what our mistakes have been. And if we can incorporate this new methodology in Scotland, we would be very happy to support. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. Super interesting, and I love machinery and yeah, and fashion, and looking at how those efficiencies. So thank you. So we do have a couple of hands raised. Carol, I'm assuming that is from past, is it? Perhaps. Are there any MSPs that have questions on the call for an adjudicator and driving efficiencies and how we can level that playing field for ethical manufacturers? I do have quite a lot in this chat function, actually. Is there any other questions at the moment? We have 2 minutes till the end of event. The MSP is very quiet today. Do we have any other questions from attendees? I'm not sure. Can attendees ask questions? Here we go. Mary Beth Graham. Hi, Mary Beth. Thank you.
Hello. Can you hear me okay?
Sure can. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this morning. It's been really amazing, such a good insight into both sides of the issue. I think I would just love to ask Fiona a wee bit more about how we see the Watchdog supporting improvements in the infrastructure in garment producing countries, because I understand that the Watchdog to a degree would allow for better decision making on the retailer's behalf, or would encourage better decision making. But we know that the system in many of the countries, especially in Bangladesh, where the infrastructure is so incredibly weak, would the Watchdog simply ask for smarter selection of suppliers who are respecting workers' rights, or would they look to be encouraging that as a whole change across manufacturing?
That might actually be a question directed to Fiona, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you. And also that echoes a different question in the chat. So essentially there are sort of two fundamental problems with the garment supply chain at the moment. One is the working conditions in the supplier factories, which is what causes most of us a large amount of concern. Now, those bad working conditions are essentially a product of very, very, very weak enforcement of labour rights. Those country governments should be checking, just like our country government should be checking, that people's basic working conditions are all right. And those countries don't do it. They don't do it adequately. Our own government is very poor, and that is part of the reason why Leicester has happened. So there's a need essentially for workers to push also on greater protections of their own government, because they're also citizens of that country. So that is, you know, one big piece that needs to happen country by country by country. And to some extent, you know, brands and retailers trying to encourage better working conditions is sticking plaster on, which isn't necessarily the best approach. It's actually about people saying these are our rights, and it's a conversation that citizens have amongst themselves about, for instance, what is the minimum wage? What do we agree as a country should be a minimum wage for our citizens? So that is something that needs to be improved. But the key driver of bad working conditions happening again and again and again and again is the retailers themselves. So what the Watchdog is going to do is deal with the main driver of bad working conditions. So to some extent, we will never get good working conditions unless we tidy up purchasing practices, because it's a key driver. But it's not necessarily going to be a guarantee that the working conditions will improve. But what we can see from COVID times last year is that when suppliers had no money, they didn't pay their workers. And they didn't have money because the retailers didn't pay. So the key driver is abusive purchasing practices. That's what we regulate in this country, because it's what we can do in this country. And it's completely within our sphere of influence to control the decision making of the businesses that choose to sell and benefit from our consumer markets. We can control that, and that's definitely within our government sphere of influence. Our government cannot legislate for the working conditions of people in Cambodia, China, Bangladesh, Myanmar. Can't do it. So it's about recognizing we drive bad working conditions and dealing with that. I hope that clarifies the distinction. So two areas for action are needed: working conditions and purchasing practices.
Thank you, Fiona. We are actually going to tie up. However, we do stay on the line for half an hour. People want to stay on, have a chat, have more questions, etc. Thank you very much to the panelists, to MSPs for coming and giving us your time. Fiona, Jenny, incredible work you both do. I just want to close. When I was doing this research, I was looking, I just Google searched the word exploitation, and this is what it came up with. The act or fact of treating someone unfairly in order to benefit from their work. Synonyms: taking advantage, making use, abuse or misuse, ill treatment, unfair treatment, bleeding dry, sucking dry, squeezing, wringing, manipulation, cheating, swindling, fleecing, victimization, enslavement, oppression, imposing on, preying on, playing on. If you'd like to add your voice to the It's Time to Clean Up fashion campaign, then you can visit the link that I'm just popping in the chat now. So thank you so very much, everybody. Thank you for joining. If anybody has further questions, please feel free. Oh.
All attendees should now be able to talk, so if there's any other questions that people want to ask the panelists, please feel free to do that now.
Fiona, can I just ask, what kind of timeline do you think you're working to? Because it would be so great to get this regulator.
Our government department for business is in charge. So the shortest timeline would be 18 months, 2 years. you know, and I mean, I see a good process as being that our Government Department for Business would run a consultation and needs to run a consultation on what needs to be in the Fair Purchasing Code, which is why in the chat function people were putting suggestions. One is IP, I agree with that. I think of sampling as being something that's different to food. Yeah. Maybe that's connected to IP. So I would expect maybe there'd be something on that would be different to the food sector, but you guys are more expert on this than I am. So, you know, you should input into that consultation. The same consultation should ensure that it would catch all of the largest retailers because they shape the culture of the sector. And the same consultation should also discuss how the regulator would work. Once the government department's done that consultation, then you move forwards to a parliamentary bill. But at the moment, they're just sort of sitting on their hands at the moment. So you know, that's why we started the petition, is we need your help to kind of move things on a bit.
Sampling is very much a bone of contention because we estimated that it costs £300 to source the fabric, do a pattern, make a sample. Now and then you submit for a range review, and then say you're making 20 samples, you get 4 or 5 orders. It's like, where are the other samples going? Some of our retailers are much more on that than others. But that is a huge cost to a small business. So IP is a major area there. Again, that's changing a little bit because you've got Optitex and, you know, things like that, the 3D software where we're beginning to design and do samples virtually, but it's still an IP issue, Fiona, for the future. Good luck, Fiona. You know I support you.
Yeah, no, and I think for when you're thinking about something being a problem, if you can also think, well, if you were a regulator, how would you determine what is fair? That's a crucial question. And the most important element of the Supermarket Watchdog Fair Purchasing Code is this thing called Principle of Fair Dealing, which basically says that the supplier should be able to plan. And it incorporates a whole kind of set of components or factors that are crucial to enabling a supplier to plan. And that, I think, is what we need to definitely transfer over from the food watchdog into the clothing watchdog.
Can I say planning is a nightmare? All right, it keeps me awake at night. 16 years we've been running our business and it still keeps me up at night. And, you know, we do have good relationships and we have been vocal, you know, and sometimes I think, do we have good relationships because we are vocal? I don't know. But all I do know is we know we've got 200 staff now. And it's scary, and I don't know any other business that is so exposed as a garment manufacturer. And you're right, it's money up front. Well, actually, we still have terms to buy fabric, for example, but invariably you're paying for that fabric before the delivery goes in, and there's no regularity. There used to be, when I was a selector at Marks and Spencer's, we used to set budgets at the beginning of a season for suppliers, you know, and they would come in, there would be presentations. This is where we're going. This is what you did last year. These are the number of units you made. These were the sales. You know, there used to be that presentation of, you did well here, you didn't do so well here. This is our growth budget, and they would allocate guidelines on budget. But I don't see that at all happening now. But then I also think, you know, with my other hat on, it's a nightmare for retailers and e-tailers as well at the moment, planning. You know, that there has to be that, what did you call it? You called it principles of fair dealing, you know, and you are right, Fiona, that there has to be a balance on both sides of the fence.
Thank you.
I'm aware that I'm meant to be in another call.
You go for it, Fiona.
I'm really sorry. I probably ought to go. I mean, if anyone's got a burning question, that'd be great. And Michelle Tiffany's question, I'm really sorry I don't understand it. Otherwise, I'd try and answer it. But and then there's a nice person who's written that we should be putting this on Instagram, and I completely agree with that. I'm not very skilled on social media, so if others could share the video on social media, link to the campaign on social media, please do that. It's a great suggestion. I read her suggestion. I was like, yes, that's a great suggestion. Don't know how to do it. Please, can you? So yeah, just wanted to say really, really appreciate being with you all. yeah, so if anyone's got a burning question, please speak up. And I also ought to say,
if anybody has a burning question, they can get in contact with us and we can pass it on. Thank you so much for being here. Jenny, thank you for being here as well today. We bid everybody farewell. Any other questions, please do fire them our way. Fashion Revolution Scotland, hang around for a few minutes if anybody has any questions. But thank you, thank you, thank you, wonderful ladies.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. So, does anybody have any questions to Fashion Revolution Scotland before we head off into our summer weeks off? No, Karen, Nikki, do you want to jump on at all?
No, there's been some great comments in the chat and the Q&A, so lots of stuff to work on, definitely.
Thank you, and I would just, if anybody has social media here on the call, if you can use it, I think to share. I think we know that the Fashion Watchdog is so important, but we know through Fashion Revolution Scotland the power of coming together and the power of raising our voices, speaking to brands, speaking to your local MSP. They all listen. They don't want to lose custom. So please take action, keep taking action, keep sharing, and share that Watchdog petition would be brilliant. Thank you.
And we will be putting the film of this meeting on our Fashion Revolution Scotland YouTube channel for you to share wherever. So that should be up in the next few days as well.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, everybody.